pedal assembly kind of just fell out of its hole. So here we've got the accelerated pedal. Normally this center pin this pivots on will slide it in and out, and generally has a circlip on the end, but I don't know if you can see that. It is pretty much rusted in there, and so I think the easiest way to do this is just going to be to cut off the actual mount, or this bracket, and because I can buy a replacement bracket. The theory was that I was potentially just going to cut out the section that was rusty up to a certain point, and essentially, you know, treat whatever I have to, weld up the seam, and then paint it from both sides. But this, I would rather have a full piece of solid steel all the way through, and it's going to be a much needed job if I actually take that whole section out, cut off the piece that needs to mend to this, and that way I can weld and flush up all the bits really nice, paint the underside, treat the backside of the beams that are going to be exposed under here, the chassis beams, and then essentially put the whole panel back in, weld up the seam along the beam, and then it'll be pretty much undetectable that I've repaired it. So what I'm doing now is going through, and wherever I think there's a spot weld, I'm drilling out the first sort of millimeter deep of it. So as you can see, I've started along here, but I've used a permanent marker to sort of go around and identify where I think they all are, and then once I drill them all out, I can basically do a cut through this point here, which is about the width of the sheet, and then go from there. And then that way I can patch on the good section of steel with all the correct holes onto this piece outside of the car, so I'm not, you know, trying to lay underneath and lay in there in an awkward angle and try and weld it. I can work at a bench, and yeah, should get a neater job. So let's get this thing out. I've put in the substitute panel about 1.5 millimeters this way of where it's supposed to go. You'll see the overlap here and the overlap here. And what that allows for is the kerf of the cutting disc, so the thickness of the cutting disc can run along the edge of this piece of steel here, and then when you go to put the new piece back in, it's going to butt up right next to the existing floor and be a nice, neat, straight join. So this is going to provide a bit of a template for me to run the grinding disc along, and obviously then I can just weld up these little screw holes later. So I've made my nice neat cut through there, and what I'm doing now is I'm just going along with a screwdriver. I don't have a chisel on me, but I think this is pretty good. It's a pretty fine tip screwdriver, and we're just going to go through and essentially pry around each spot weld and crack the joint. So as you can see here, I've already done that, and so the idea is that we pry it away all the way around. It comes out as a nice neat piece, and then when we go to weld it back in, we can use the same holes to plug weld it back to the car. So I'm going to go along here and attempt to get all this up. This end of the panel I'm not too worried about, because it's going to get replaced pretty much from about here on. So anything from there back, I don't care what condition it's in, but I'm going to try and keep this front lip nice and neat, so that when it goes back in, it looks like it was never touched. I've just grinded back as much of the rust as I sort of could to where it was solid. Now, I don't know if you can see, I've just scribed a line across here. That's where I'm going to cut and graft on from there back of the new one, because notice the original floor panel has the little nuts to thread into, has the little rubber stop on the opposite side for the pedal arm, has these two holes in the right spot, the pedal bracket thing there, we need to keep that too. So yeah, basically going to just cut it off through there and graft that onto that. G'day. So the plan is, you saw that the grooves didn't line up to where they have to go, because this was originally here, right? But it needs to be here. And so what we're going to be left with is this void. And I don't want to be trying to weld in a piece later. It's just gonna, it just won't turn out very good. So the better way to do this is, before I weld this in, is to patch a section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seam weld all the way along here and clean that up beautifully and flat, and then what I'll do is then I'll re-scribe this, cut through there, and then put that piece in, and then we'll be sweet. So this is the first test fit. I've just got it sitting in place. I know this is the right distance forward because this obviously follows the original body line, and I also scribed a line across through here. Now, looks great, but we're about look, give or take, we're probably 8mm short. I'm going to zoom in here. Obviously it's sitting up, but if that's sitting down, that's about where it needs to be. So this panel needs to grow. So many of you will say, oh, he's cut it short, and yeah, basically I have. But what I was determining that length from was the fold matching up with the old fold in the contours, because remember, I don't know if you saw or you would have seen earlier on in the video, I sat the old one over the new one and lined up the holes. It just goes to show that you can't just rely on the holes lining up for the overall length to be right. So the best thing I can do here is, I've just spent a lot of time getting all that really neat and tidy. I've just spot welded it, and I'm pretty much ready just to do the final welds through there. So to fix this problem, honestly, it's, by the time this gets done, it's going to get welded in, seam sealed, and you won't even really be looking at this part. I mean, reality is there's going to be a mat there. But what I'm going to do to make this presentable is likely finish that off, make all that beautiful, and I'm just going to have to weld a strip on the back edge the whole way along, clean it up, and then weld it in, because that's just not gonna do for me. And I'm not cutting it through the middle because of all these stampings. It's gonna, that's all correct now. So the only thing that's wrong is the overall length. So anyway, let's get this bit welded up and we'll do that next. All this is cleaned up both sides, and I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I need to do is fix the fact that this is short. Somewhere along the lines between the stampings and when I've cut it and alignment, it's short. And so the solution is going to be, I think, is essentially cut straight through here so that I can move that back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld a strip of steel through. I'll bend it up to match this groove, and then I'll weld that back on. So we're essentially just going to have two weld lines, which I'll clean up, and then it'll all be sweet.
A company called iSimple make a proper Bluetooth thing.
Well, it's quite a bit of interest, but
I think this section of rust here I'm not going to be able to get with the patch, the floor repair, so that may be, I might be able to make something up with the offcut I had from that, but at least most of this is going to get cut out. So let's just do this one-handed and grab our repair piece and see how much it actually covers. So this is going to go in here like that. So well, it gets most of it. It's really just this little small little area here, and so I reckon I'm going to be able to just go boom in like that, and you know, I might be able to patch that little bit in there. You know, you're probably all going to go, why didn't you just replace the whole floor? Look, I could have, and it might have been an easier fix, but it was legitimately about 3 times the price as buying the 2 patch panels. And I figured, well, you know, as you can see here, I've salvaged some of the original stampings anyway, so yeah, I just didn't think it was necessary to replace the whole floor. By the time we're done, at least we've got to practice up with the welding, so oh well. Now, the tricky part is with this one is, in order for this to be the original 5mm or so reveal, which looks like about that, you know, it's only about 5mm. The problem with that is then we have this issue, is the stampings don't line up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to prioritise the stampings, so that looks right. I'm going to prioritise the gap along here, make sure that this is going to join up nice. And if that ends up being a slightly bit bigger, I'm not too worried, because there's plenty of a ledge there for me to weld back to, and by the time that gets seam sealed and a mat goes over the top, it's not going to be an issue. seen, I've just wire wheeled all around here and clean this up so it's nice and fresh. Knock down any of the high spots from the old welds. And I'm just gonna, I don't even know if this is the best solution, but it's what I could get at the time. It's a weld through primer. So if you can recommend anything better than this, please do. I do find that even though it says weld through primer, it's not really that weld through. So really this is more just security between the panels. So when I sandwich this together, it's not just raw metal against raw metal and then it gets trapped in there, and if any moisture gets in there it's just going to rust again. So I will seam seal from both sides of this, so technically nothing should get in there, but this is just that extra bit of security.